Erev Tov Rabotai, we are continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Bava Kamma. We are up to Perik Chet Mishnah Alayev. Today's Mishnayot should be Leilu Nishmat Neria ben Svetlana Ranbai Eliyahu ben Burcha Israelov Chana bat Miriam Sason ben Raya and Yoshua ben Shifra Menuchatam began Eden Amen and Lavdir ben Chaim lechaim v'derefua shenemav Daniel Shalom ben Rosa betoch Shah Chulei Yisrael and the Achlama Mera Binyamin Od Zion Chai ben Dvorah. This chapter deals with the laws of physical injuries inflicted by one person on another. The first Mishnah lists and explains the different payments that the attacker must make to the victim. Hachovel b'chavero chayav alav mishum chamisha dvarim. Someone who wounds another person is obligated to pay him for 5 things, meaning 5 aspects of the injury. Benezek, number 1, for the damage itself, meaning the victim's loss of value. Betzar, number 2, for the pain that he suffered. B'ripui, number 3, for the expenses of healing. B'shevet, number 4, for loss of employment. Uvevoshet, number 5, and for embarrassment. Each of these 5 types of payments is derived from a verse. Now, the Mishnah means that the attacker can be obligated to pay for up to 5 categories of damage. If he inflicted all 5, he must pay for all 5. If he inflicted fewer than 5, for example, he burned the victim lightly, causing pain, but none of the other types of damage, he pays only for what he inflicted. The Mishnah elaborates on each of these 5 categories, starting with damage. Benezek kitzad. How is the payment for damage calculated? Simeh teno kata et yado shiber et raglo. If, for example, he blinded the victim's eye, cut off his hand, or broke his leg. Roin oto kilu hu eved nimkar bashuk. We view the victim as though he were a servant being sold in the market. Vishamin kama ya yafeh vechama hu yafeh. And we estimate how much he was worth when he still had the eye, hand, or leg, and how much he is worth without it. The attacker must pay the difference. Now, a Jew in need of money can sell himself as a servant, eved divri. Now that the victim's value has been reduced because of the injury, he cannot sell himself for as much as he could before. Since the attacker, so to speak, made him lose that amount of money, he must compensate him for it. The second payment, pain. Tsar, how is the payment for pain calculated? Kiva'o, bishfut, or b'masmer. If, for example, he burned the victim with a hot iron spit or with a hot nail. Va'afilu al tziporno makom sheno oseh chabura. Even if he burned him on his fingernail, which is a place where a burn does not make a wound that would reduce his market value. In this case, the attacker pays for pain, but not for damage. Omdin kama adam kayotze bazer rotze lito liot mitzvah kach. We estimate how much a man like this victim with his particular sensitivity and tolerance of pain would want to take to suffer such pain, and the attacker must pay him that amount. Now, the Mishnah seems to mean that the court makes the following assessment. If the victim was offered money in order to suffer the level of pain that was inflicted upon him, how much would he demand? However, the Gemara on page 85a in Masechet Bava Kamma argues that this cannot be the Mishnah's meaning, because a person would not agree to suffer great pain even if he were paid all the money in the world. Therefore, the Gemara explains that we assess the payment for pain as follows. How much would the victim give in order to avoid the pain? For example, if his hand had to be cut off in any event, how much would he pay to have the operation done in such a way that he would not feel pain? The amount he would pay is the amount the attacker must give him, and this is how the Tosfot Yom Tov explains as part of the Mishnah. Ripui, the third category of healing. Ripui, what is healing? Hikau chayav lerapoto. If one struck another, he is obligated to heal him, meaning he must pay the expenses of healing the injury, such as doctor bills and medicines. Some laws about the obligation to pay for healing. Alu bot tzmachim. If blisters developed on his skin near the wound, im mechamat makah chayav. The law is that if they developed as a result of the wound, the attacker is obligated to pay for healing them as well. Even if the blisters appeared later, if they were caused by the wound, the attacker must pay to heal them. Shalom machmat makeh patur. Shalom machmat makah patur. But if they did not develop as a result of the wound, he is not obligated to pay for healing them. Meaning, if the blisters resulted from the victim's negligence, for example, he did not follow the doctor's orders, the attacker does not have to pay to heal them, even though they would have not developed had there been no wound in the first place. Now, when the Mishnah mentions blisters, it's merely giving an example. The same laws apply to any infection or sickness that result from the injury. Chayta v'nistara. If the wound healed and returned, and then again it healed and returned, meaning it kept returning because it never fully healed, chayav lerapoto, the attacker is obligated to heal him, meaning he must pay for the medical expenses again and again until it is healed completely. Chayta kotsurka. However, if the wound healed completely and then returned, the attacker is not obligated to heal him. The victim cannot claim that the wound returned because of the original injury. Rather, since the wound healed completely, we assume that it returned as a result of some other factor for which the attacker is not responsible. Now, the fourth payment, loss of employment. Shevet, how is loss of employment calculated? If the victim cannot do the type of work that he did before, for example, he lost a hand and cannot work without it, we view him as though he were a watchman of a field of cucumbers, because that is all he is fit to do now. The attacker must pay him the wages of a cucumber watchman for every day that his illness, which was caused by the injury, keeps him bedridden and prevents him from doing even such simple work. However, the attacker does not have to pay him the wages he was earning before he was wounded, because he has already given him the value of his hand or the value of his foot when he paid for damage, and that amount included whatever he would have earned had he not been injured. Now, the Mishnah's case is where the victim was injured in such a way that he will never be able to return to his previous profession, and for the rest of his life, he will have to do simple, low-paying jobs such as watching a patch of cucumbers. Furthermore, the injury caused him to be sick for some time, during which he could not work at all. The permanent reduction of salary from that of his previous profession is that of a watchman. From that of his previous profession to that of a watchman is included in the payment for damage, since damage is the change in value between a servant who could do his old profession and one who can only be a watchman. So after paying damage, all that remains is for the attacker to compensate him for his inability to do any work, even watching a small field when he was sick and bedridden. This is the payment for loss of employment. The fifth payment, embarrassment, boshet. How is embarrassment calculated? It all depends on the status of the one who caused the embarrassment and the status of the one who was embarrassed. The lower the status of the attacker, the greater the disgrace he causes, and the higher the status of the victim, the greater the disgrace he suffers. We estimate how much a person of the victim's status would pay to avoid being embarrassed by someone of the attacker's status, and the attacker must pay that amount. Now, some laws about the payment for embarrassment. If someone embarrasses a naked person, for example, he spits on him or slaps him. Now, although he is naked, he is shamed by these acts, though not as much as a clothed person would be. If he embarrasses a blind person who senses that he is being disgraced even though he cannot see it. Or if he embarrasses a sleeping person who upon waking realizes that he had been disgraced in his sleep. Chayav, in each of these cases, he is obligated to pay for the disgrace that he caused, because people suffer disgrace even if they are unclothed, blind, or asleep at the time. However, the attacker is not obligated to pay as much as one who embarrasses a clothed, seeing, or awake person. But if a sleeping person embarrassed someone, for example, he kicked another person in his sleep or he fell off his bed on top of him, he is not obligated to pay, because one must pay for embarrassing someone only if he attacked him intentionally, like we learned from the verse that's going to be quoted in the Mishnah. If someone fell from a roof by accident and injured and embarrassed another person by falling on him, he is obligated to pay for the damage, because a person must pay damage even if the attack was unintentional, like we learned in chapter 2, Mishnah 6. But he is not obligated to pay for the embarrassment, because payment for embarrassment is required only in the case of an intentional attack. Shneimar, as the verse says in Dvarim, chapter 25, verse 11, Mishalcha yadah vehechezika bimvushav. Vehechezika bimvushav, right? As it is stated regarding the payment for embarrassment, if men fight one another and the wife of one of them approaches to rescue her husband from the hand of the one who is hitting him, and to do so she stretches out her hand and grasps his embarrassing place, meaning his private parts, to embarrass him and stop him from hitting her husband. The words "and she stretches out her hand" imply that she attacks him intentionally. Therefore, from here we learn one is not obligated to pay for embarrassing someone unless he intended to harm him. However, if he did intend to harm the victim, he must pay for embarrassment, even if he intended only to injure him and not to embarrass him. And that is then of Mishnah Aleph. Mishnah Bet contrasts the law of a person who injures a person with the law of an animal that injures a person. This is a stringency that applies to a person rather than to an ox, meaning a person who injures another person is treated more stringently in the following respects than the owner of an ox or any other animal that injures a person. A person who injures another person pays for damage, pain, healing, loss of employment, and embarrassment, like Mishnah 1 taught us. And if he injures a pregnant woman, causing her to miscarry, he pays the value of the fetus. But the owner of an ox that injures a person pays only for damage. The Torah states in Vayikra chapter 24 verse 19, and if a man inflicts a blemish, a wound on his fellow, as he did, so shall be done to him, meaning he shall make the 5 payments. By stating man, the verse implies that only a person who injures another person must make all 5 payments, but if an ox injures a person, its owner needs to not pay all of them. And if it causes the pregnant woman to miscarry, he is exempt from paying the value of the fetus. And that is the Nabotai of today's Mishna Yomi. Baruch Adonai Le'olam. Amen v'amen.